Welcome back. And just for some context here, the following is a member of the United States Senate, Republican Senator John No Relation Kennedy of Louisiana, on Fox News yesterday morning.
Senator Kennedy, who do you believe was responsible for hacking the DNC and Clinton campaign computers, their emails? Was it Russia or Ukraine?
I don't know, nor do you, nor do any of us.
The entire intelligence community says it was Russia.
Right, but it could also be Ukraine. I'm not saying that I know one way or the other.
This from John Harwood over at CNBC, and we quote, "Here's a Republican senator disseminating Russian intelligence propaganda fabricated to harm the United States. He's doing it because it helps him politically." And Sherilyn Ifill over at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund writes this, quote, "The next question should rightly be, why did you and 7 other Republican senators travel to Russia on the 4th of July, 2018? What was the purpose of the trip? With whom did you meet? Are there notes memorializing the conversations you and the other senators had with Russian officials?" The senator is repeating Russian propaganda. Just last week, former NSC aide and foremost Russian expert Dr. Fiona Hill labeled the notion of Ukraine meddling in the 2016 election a fictional narrative. And the Times report about how members of the U.S. Senate have been briefed that Russia has engaged in a years-long campaign to frame Ukraine as responsible for 2016 meddling. Earlier today, former FBI Special Agent Clint Watts, a frequent guest on this broadcast, he'll be back tomorrow night, said he was among those who briefed Senator Kennedy on Russian election interference in 2017, and he added this.
We're in very dangerous ground at this point because the whole idea of Ukraine was inserted into our country by Russia, who just attacked us. They're doubling down on their victory. They're advancing it right inside our country again. And how is it happening this time? It's not because people are falling for it. It's because people are willingly advancing that conspiracy.
Okay, then just tonight on CNN, Senator John No Relation Kennedy appeared to want to clean this all up.
I was answering one of his questions, and he interjected a statement and asked me to react to it. What I heard Chris say was he made the statement that only Russia had tried to interfere in the election. And I answered the question. That's not what he said. I went back and looked at the transcript. He said only Russia tried to hack the DNC computer. Now, Chris is right. I was wrong. The only evidence I have, and I think it's overwhelming, is that it was Russia who tried to hack the DNC computer.
So that sounded there like a correction, but then minutes later, he was back to hinting that it might have been Ukraine.
If you'll look at the articles I talked about, you will see that there is a lot of evidence that Ukraine did try to meddle in the election in 2016.
There's our jumping on point for this next conversation. And with us for more tonight, Philip Rucker, Pulitzer Prize-winning White House bureau chief for The Washington Post. Philip, as our mothers would say, Senator Kennedy knows better. Why do you think he's doing this?
You know, Brian, I think the answer is President Trump. In the White House, the president, rather, has propagated a number of these conspiracy theories that have been unproven and, in fact, disproven by U.S. intelligence agencies, as well as by Dr. Fiona Hill, his former national security expert on Russia. But the president has continued to advance the notion that Ukraine was behind some sort of conspiracy to undermine his campaign in 2016 and interfere in the election. And he's done so in part because he has taken President Putin's word, as he said in Helsinki in 2018 when he appeared at that news conference with President Putin and said publicly that he believed Putin's, quote, very strong denials that Russia was behind the election interference. That just is not true, according to the conclusion of all of the American intelligence agencies.
So, Phil, you've got a U.S. senator, and he has a lot of company in the Senate and the House, using talking points, in effect, translated from the original Russian. If, in fact, there are no Republican votes to convict and or remove in the U.S. Senate, is there any other mechanism for good government types in the Republican Party to get a message over to the White House that what's at the heart of this is just not cool?
You know, that's a really important question because as it stands right now, there does not appear to be any Republican votes to convict President Trump, although we've yet to even have the vote in the House and the Senate trial has not begun. But there certainly are a number of Republican senators, including Mitt Romney of Utah and others, who have spoken out that they believe the president's conduct has been inappropriate and wrong and troubling, and certainly would be in agreement with what you just said, that it is not cool to be advancing Russian state security propaganda, as Senator Kennedy has done. You know, there might be a way to condemn the president. There might be some sort of vote that they could take or some sort of formal statement that the Senate could issue about the president's behavior, even if they stop short of convicting him and removing him from office.
Mr. Nunes is back in the news, and not just for his presentation in the hearing room. This is a story that puts him more centrally into the Ukraine drama amid his threats to sue news organizations. Last time he was caught up in the news, he recused himself back when he was chair of the committee. No such moves are evident to us, at least early on now. Has there been a kind of a hardening of the mindset and or attitude that you're aware of?
There certainly seems to be a hardening of the mindset on that committee when it comes to the Democrats and the Republicans, with the Republicans becoming even more fierce in their defense of President Trump, even as the allegations coming forth in that hearing room have been so troubling and damaging. You know, Ranking Member Nunes, the top Republican on the panel, he has yet to fully answer questions pertaining to his trip to Ukraine and his involvement, his meetings that he had, which came out in the reporting over the last few days. We'll see if he does so when Congress returns after Thanksgiving. But clearly, he is in the middle of this controversy right now, as he has been, frankly, from the beginning of the Trump presidency. Remember, it was Nunes who rushed over to the White House at night to deal with some matters pertaining to the early stages of the Russia investigation. And ever since, he has been a fierce defender of President Trump's.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.